Hello and welcome to ShrikeCast again. Today we are going to go over creating a VPN, site-to-site VPN connection from one firewall to another. Could be SonicWALL to another SonicWALL, or to a Cisco or Linksys, Netgear, whatever other device you might have on the other side. Checkpoint is another one that comes to mind. So what we're going to do is start by going to our live demo site that I mentioned last time. It's livedemo.sonicwall.com, and I am going to select a UTM firewall, and we're going to work on the NSA 240 today. These features we talk about will be available on the TZ100 and the 200, 210, all the other UTM firewalls as well, but I'm just deciding on the NSA today. So once we're in the interface, I'm going to show you a few things in the VPN settings first. Before we go building a VPN tunnel, let's go into our advanced section, and we're going to talk about some of these settings here. When you go into yours, make sure that these options are enabled. We want to make sure that IKE dead peer detection is turned on. DPD is the system that detects whether or not the other side is not responding properly, or the VPN tunnel has gone down, as we call it. And then either that VPN tunnel will stay down, or it will try to rebuild itself if you have Keepalive turned on, or if there's interesting traffic headed across the tunnel. So you can leave the defaults on, or reduce it from this if you want it to check sooner, or if you want it to miss less number of heartbeats in order to trigger a failure and then cause the VPN to recreate. We're going to do that for idle VPN sessions as well. Again, I'm going to keep everything default here. I am going to make sure that fragmented packet handling is turned on in the VPN area. And we're going to leave the ignore don't fragment bit checked. So some applications can flag the packets that are sent out as don't fragment. And if they are oversized going across a VPN tunnel, you end up adding size to your header for your packets being sent out. They can be above 1500 bytes, which is the standard maximum size for a packet. If it ends up being above that, the firewall can fragment it into two, which sometimes it can cause a problem if your data is encrypted, in this case with a VPN. Sometimes it's fine. It kind of depends on what kind of inspections you're doing, what routers you end up hopping across on the way. But as a standard, I like to keep these enabled. It seems to work better most of the time. Gets around some misconfigurations and things that people miss. Enable Nat Traversal we're going to have enabled as well. So in case we have our SonicWALL behind another NAT device, like the one that comes to my mind right now is a Comcast SMC modem that's used quite often for business. They give out a 10 dot something address, and so we would be behind another device providing network address translation. So having NAT Traversal enabled for our VPN is very useful to make sure we can get across that other NAT device. We're going to leave the rest of the options below here unchecked. And the one thing I want you to go and do is click on this configure button for the IKE v2 dynamic client proposal. In IKE v2, which is the replacement for IKE v1, which came out a while ago, whenever you build a main mode or aggressive mode tunnel, you are creating an IKE version 1 tunnel. IKE version 2 combines main mode and aggressive mode into one protocol, and with IKE v2, since it combines both of those, you can have the other side, the other peer that you're connecting to be a static IP, dynamic DNS name, something like that, or it can be completely dynamic and you don't know what IP address they're coming from, which is what you would use for an old aggressive mode tunnel with IKE version 1. For some reason in SonicWALL they have the proposal settings for dynamic IKE v2 tunnels hidden in this little section here, and by default they dynamically negotiate and assume group 2 triple DES and SHA-1 for our proposal settings. I like to bump this up to at least group 5 and AES 256. If you want a little bit more secure, you can go to group 14, but I normally leave it at just group 5 and AES 256. So I'm on this live demo thing, so if I click OK, it's going to not allow me to save it anyway. But go ahead and select that on your SonicWALL. That'll make sure that in the future, whenever you have any dynamic VPN tunnels created, they're using the highest level of security that you can. So right off the bat, you're making sure everything is as encrypted as possible, and you're using the highest level of security that's currently available. So let's go back to the settings area for VPN, and by default you see we only have WAN and WLAN group VPNs added, which these are for remote access users. If they want to access from home using the SonicWALL GVC clients, they would, or over the wireless network, they would do that through the settings in these group VPNs. We're going to add a separate additional VPN policy. And you'll notice that I'm not using the wizard here. There is a wizard for creating VPNs and doing a lot of other nice things. I like to do VPNs just the basic manual method. It gives you greater control. It doesn't assume as many things, and you can tweak things to be exactly how you want. So in the first section here, we have our general information that we need to enter for our security policy, security association. We give it a general name. This could be my other site, whatever that other location's name is, something identifiable. It'll show up in that name area of our VPN policies. We then have two available options for static IP address, DDNS name, or if it's dynamic and you have no idea what they might be coming from, you can leave it blank. This is really the defining factor for IKE version 2 as to whether you're going to do a main mode or aggressive mode tunnel, or if it's going to be dynamic or not, is whether or not you enter something here. So if they have a static IP, for example, I'll put in like Google's DNS right here, you can enter that in, and if they have a secondary backup internet connection that accepts VPN proposals over it, you can enter that in there as well. Most VPNs people use a pre-shared key. It's the easiest way of going about creating a VPN. You can also use certificates and other methods like that, but most people just make up some sort of complex standard password, a shared secret, and over the phone both sides will share that secret, type it in, and that's the what we'll use to create the second level of tunnel, the Ipsec tunnel. So here I could put in my VPN to other side, and then we'll have to enter that twice. And for local IKE ID and pure IKE ID, we have an option of using the IP address to identify them, or we could use other things such as a firewall identifier or domain name, email address, some other options here. I normally switch between IP address or firewall identifier. If they are a dynamic tunnel and we don't know where they're coming from, they don't have a static address on the other side, I'm going to use a firewall identifier, and for my side I will say this is my router, and then their side will be their router, or whatever I might call it on their side. And then the other side will have to be configured in the exact same way, just in reverse. And it's used to be called SonicWALL identifier in the older firmwares. They've now renamed it firewall identifier so that you can be cross-compatible. But most of the time, if you have static IPs on both sides, you can just leave it as IP address, and that'll work fine. But I'm going to leave it as firewall identifier for now, just for sake of that. We go to the next tab, and it's going to be our network tab. You have local and remote networks. Most of the time, when you're creating a standard VPN, we'll get into more advanced VPN stuff later in another video, but this time for the basic stuff, for the local networks, we're going to choose our LAN subnets. There it is. So LAN subnets is a group that's automatically created that encompasses any subnets that you create in the firewall that are in the zone of LAN. So you can also specify it based on the interface. So usually your LAN interface that you're going to build your VPNs to is going to be the X0 connection, which is your default LAN connection on the SonicWALLs. So you could also use X0 subnet, but I like to use the group so that if I ever have multiple LAN interfaces, it's already built for me. That's my decision. It's up to you how you wish to configure it. The remote side, we're going to have to create an address object for the network on the other side. So what I'm going to do is go here and create an address object, and I'm going to name it. So this is going to be their network on the other side. I'm going to change the zone assignment to VPN because we're telling the SonicWALL that this network that we're creating is in the VPN zone, so that when we deal with the firewall rules, it's in the correct area, and we can filter traffic with firewall rules properly. If it's not in the right zone, we won't be able to do that correctly. And then we're going to change the type to network. So let's say my side here is on my network is 192.168.1.0/24. Pretty standard network. Their side might be 192.168.2.0. And then we'll create a standard subnet mask /24. You'd go ahead and click OK. Again, in this with the live demo we can't because we're in non-configuration mode, but you just click OK and it would show up in here as their network. Go over to the Proposals tab, and here's where it really gets interesting. If you have two relatively modern SonicWALLs running Enhanced OS, you can use Ike version 2. If you are connecting to an older SonicWALL, or if you're using an older SonicWALL to begin with, you might not have that option if you're running Standard OS. If you're connecting to most Cisco routers as of this recording in February 2012, unless they've been recently updated, there you have to end up using Ike version 1 because Cisco only recently released Ike version 2 support, like 6 or 7 years late, into their products in the ASA devices. So most people who are running Cisco don't really know about Ike version 2 yet, even though it's vastly superior to the old Ike version 1. Some of the checkpoint firewalls you might build to, it might be 50-50 on whether or not they can support it. A lot of security admins that I've run into aren't aware of Ike version 2, even if their route firewalls can support it. And even if they're aware of it, they don't really know what it is. So, like I mentioned, Ike version 2 is simply the replacement to Ike version 1. It's an RFC that was released. It has deprecated the older Ike version 1 exchange protocols. So the default now should be Ike version 2. If you can do it, do Ike version 2. They've rebuilt everything from scratch. Ike version 1 had a lot of things added to it over the years. Nat Traversal had some problems with DPD, the dead peer detection that were added in, the dynamic connections, a lot of encryption protocols, encryption algorithms were added into Ike later on. So it's gotten kind of messy over time. Ike version 2 took that, combined it all into one, simplified things, reduced the number of packets necessary to create the tunnel, made it more secure, made everything interoperable, a lot nicer, a lot cleaner. I find my Ike version 2 tunnels come up within seconds and stay up if I have Keepalive turned on almost all the time. The main mode, aggressive mode, Ike version 1 tunnels, they're kind of a crapshoot depending on the situation of the tunnel. So if you have the ability to do so, I suggest you change your exchange to Ike version 2. And if you had changed the dynamic Ike version 2 proposals in that advanced area to group 5 with AES 256, from now on you would be always choosing group 5 AES 256, whether it's a dynamic connection, a static connection. You can always choose that highest level of encryption. So since I put in a static IP on that general tab, I'm going to try and bump up the encryption on this to make it a little bit more secure. And I like to match both phase 1 and phase 2. So phase 1 I've gone through, I've selected Ike version 2, group 5 for my Diffie-Hellman group, AES-256 for my encryption. It's the highest level of encryption currently available. SHA-1 for my authentication. And for phase 2, I've matched that with the encryption as AES-256, and the protocol and the authentication are staying the same. One thing to mention here before I move on, I don't normally turn on perfect forward secrecy. I've had problems with it. Sometimes it doesn't rekey properly in my experience unless it's been resolved in newer SonicWALL firmware versions. If you want to have additional security and you want it to rekey the tunnel more often, you can turn on perfect forward secrecy, and that will force it to rebuild the tunnel more often and keep things more secure. And by more secure, I should state that AES-256 by itself, I've read somewhere that it was it'll take upwards of 70 million years to try and crack AES-256 with a standard desktop computer. So with that in mind, you're renegotiating those keys, those AES-256 keys, every 28,800 seconds, which is, I believe, 8 hours. So someone would have to crack that ridiculously high encryption level within that time frame, and then sniff your data, find your, decrypt your data, interpret it, and then within that 8-hour mark, it'll then rekey itself, and they have to do it all over again. So by enabling perfect forward secrecy quite often is overkill in my opinion. On the Advanced tab, most of the time you can just leave this blank. The one thing I would suggest you can do is turn on Keepalive. If you know what the static IP is or the dynamic DNS name is that you've configured on the General tab, if you've entered that in for the other side and you know what that is, then you can enable Keepalive and the tunnel will try to keep itself up all the time. So by default, a VPN tunnel is designed to be off and be down unless interesting traffic tries to traverse the tunnel, at which point it will try to build a tunnel and traverse the traffic to the other side. The problem with that in reality is most businesses want it to work immediately. If they lose one packet, they say, oh, it's running slow, there's something not right, it's not, there's something wrong. So I like to have Keepalive on and just keep the tunnels up 24/7. If there's any problem with the VPN connection, if you don't have Keepalive on, you might not know about it unless someone tries to use it, and if it's a critical time period that they need to use it, well, now everything is red flag and you have to rush to try and repair a problem with routing or the ISP or something like that. So having Keepalive on, you have a better idea as to whether or not the VPN is having a problem. If it's off and it's down and the Keepalive is turned on, well, now you have something that you can look at maybe after hours when people aren't trying to use it. So I like to have Keepalive turned on if possible. You also want to have Keepalive on the other location that if they have a dynamic IP address, say I was a location here that had a dynamic IP address and I was building it to a main location, like a main office that had a static IP, I would want to turn on Keepalive on my side so that I can always try to bring up the tunnel to the main location. It's a useful feature. And Keepalive, again, was updated in Ike version 2. That was another one of those features they fixed. Whereas before in Ike version 1 it was kind of hit or miss at times as to whether or not it would work well. Keepalive seems to be fixed along with its interaction with dead peer detection in Ike version 2. We'll go into some of these other options in another video, such as doing some advanced NAT policies with VPNs. One thing you could turn on is enable NetBIOS broadcast if you're using some older Windows workstations and you're trying to do file sharing or something like that across your VPN. By rebroadcasting NetBIOS across your VPN tunnel, that could resolve some issues related to your file sharing. So with that, we can click OK, and it would show up in here as a VPN policy. And then you would have to go into the other side, and they would have to go through and configure it in the same way, but with the reversed information. Like I said, the local and the remote would have to be swapped. The proposals would remain the same, and some of the information on that general tab would have to point to this location instead. So that was just a quick overview of how to build a VPN in a SonicWALL. That's how I go through and do things. There's always variables as to how you want to set things up, but that's the general default policies that I normally use.